Hello and welcome to Subtext. In this video, I want to introduce you to Subtext itself and to show you how you can start to develop stories. At the time of this recording, Subtext is in a bit of a transitional mode where there was a certain way it was built over the last 5 years, and tools were set up to accommodate the way that computers were working at that time. In the last year, things have changed a bit with artificial intelligence and chatbots, and specifically with Subtxt Muse, to the point where you're going to be able to develop and write your entire story just right here and be able to have it form the structure according to what it is that you're writing. But before that comes into play, right now there's a balancing act between what I like to call the boxes version of Subtext and Subtxt Muse here. So Subtxt Muse is the chatbot artificial intelligence that's hooked up to everything so that you can quickly develop any kind of story that you would like. And the idea is that you can step in here and simply just write what it is that you want if you have an idea for a story. So in other words, I just came in here and wrote, I want to write a story about a mysterious house in the middle of Vermont, late 1800s. I wanted to have some supernatural aspects to it, but I wanted to all end in complete tragedy. Because typically speaking, when you use these kind of chatbots, if you don't have subtext, everything works out nice and rosy. So Muse starts to describe to you what you would want to do, create that tragic ending, which is not only that the protagonist fails to achieve their goal, but also that the main character ends up emotionally crushed. That's really important. And then what I did is I didn't have a title for it yet. So I just asked it to come up with a bunch of different ideas for titles. I picked the one that I liked and I said, can you start a new story for me based on that? So the idea is that you have your story idea and then you're going to apply structure to it. You're going to project structure onto it and create a story form. You're going to form some sort of structure around it. What it did here is it created the story in Subtext called Echoes of Vermont, and then began to ask me important questions that will lead you to getting to a story form. And you'll see here down on the bottom left, it automatically assigned it to that. And then I can go ahead and continue to build it. Until we get to that point where you can have it just then build your story form, I have to do it manually, which then leads to what you will find over here when you create a story and you actually have a story form. So in other words, prior to Muse, you had to know your story structure first, which was hard for some people to get a hold of because sometimes you don't know exactly what it is you want to say with your story. So right here, I have the story form from Silence of the Lambs that's already in place here. And these are all the different thematic story points that this line of questioning will eventually lead to. So assuming you know how all of this works and you've created a story form over here, you can start to plot out your entire story and make sure everything's balanced and there's no holes in the narrative. Until that point, you have these 4 steps here in the imagining section. So the idea is that you have your story idea here, which is what you would have here in Subtxt Muse, but you have to type it in your box and it would be constricted into how that would be developed. And then once you would have that, then you would go to the next step, which is then to find out the complete story. With Subtxt Muse, that's becoming more of a conversation. It's doing the same thing, asking you what these 4 through lines are, but it's a way that's a little more natural and easier for writers to go through. Until that time, you have this hybrid approach where you have all these boxes here, and all the boxes pretty much work the same. So in other words, this objective story through line here, this is the plot of your story. And the storytelling is where you would put in what it is that your story is about. So to do something completely different, the plot is about a dragon wants to be a knight. All right, so he wants to be a knight. Now you'll notice there's no place to save. You don't have to hit a button in order to save things. If you notice at the top of the screen, you'll see this little gold flash. That is Subtext saving everything to the cloud. So if I call this, maybe he wants to be a paladin. Watch at the top, flash. All right, I spelled it wrong, so maybe I want to fix that. Spell it. Okay, all that is saved. If I hit refresh and I reload the entire story, it defaults to the story form. If I jump back to complete story and I open it up, everything's still there. It's all saved automatically. And then in most of the cards, you'll see a teach button here. So if you don't know what the objective story through line is, you can hit the teach button and then it will explain it to you. Again, this is pre-chatbot days, pre-artificial intelligence days. It uses artificial intelligence, but not in the way that's nice and convenient. I would personally just pop open Muse here and then just ask, what the heck is the objective story through line? And it will start to explain it to you. And then you can come up with an answer to what it is that you want your objective story to be. And then that way you can develop your story along with Muse, and it's a little more intuitive. You also have access to this brainstorming button here, and this is throughout all of Subtxt. If you tap it once, it'll open up a little shelf here. It'll say brainstorm some ideas. If you have no idea whatsoever, you can just tap this again and it will come up with a completely random objective story through line. After experiencing a sense of intense nightmares, Adam gradually realizes that his subconscious mind is linked to a mysterious figure that follows him in his waking life. Figure is determined to break Adam's sanity and take control of his life, and it's up to Adam to figure this figure's true identity. That is actually really great. So let's say I really love that. I can just add it here to my objective story. Now, if you notice, I wanted to do this nice story about a dragon who wanted to be a knight. This one's a little more terrifying. Why is that? That's because I had selected Silence of the Lambs, which is a psychological horror. So then when it went to go do the random objective story, the random plot, it was trying to come up with something that was more geared towards that genre. That is why that is happening there. If I want to add some ideas in here, like maybe Adam is a writer and I can tap that, it will go ahead and use what I've written here and use that to help brainstorm ideas. So you can put keywords in here, anything you want. Adam, a struggling writer, has to come to accept the oppressive silence in his home until strange events start to randomly manifest. So this is not using this here. So you can continue to add in new ideas. I can just add that. And now I have these two ideas in here for the objective story. Now, if I want to develop this and maybe put them together, I can call upon Muse to help me merge these two together. So I can just say develop. Muse will open up with everything that was written here. So this has both these different points in here, and it asks, how would you like to develop this storytelling? Can you please merge these two together into a single idea? And then it should do a pretty relatively decent job of merging them together. Adam, a struggling writer, is haunted by a mysterious figure. You can see it did a great job of putting those two together. What I can do is then hit the clipboard button here, copy that, close it, and then I can just come in here and replace. And now I've developed the objective story. This is how you interact with Subtxt through the boxes. They're everywhere. If I go into the plot and I were to work out how the story starts, what the goal is, how it ends, the individual players that are in there, you'll notice that it has an additional thing up here where it helps you illustrate how that plot point would work in the story. Now, what this is doing is Subtxt is trying to help you gear your storytelling with the story structure that is here in the story form. There is a chance that the random illustration that came up here doesn't quite align with how you imagine your story to begin. For instance, if I tap on this, it's saying that this first story driver, the plot of your story, has to be something that's motivated by cause. So somebody trying to instigate something. And the reason for that is because the story form of Silence of the Lambs has that as the problem in the plot. So then that's why there is an act shift, or why the story starts is because someone is trying to cause something. This is where Subtxt separates structure from storytelling. So you could have a problem of cause that is showing up here in the first story driver, your first plot point. But then there's a bunch of different ways that you can illustrate this. You could be an initiator, start an argument with something, instigate a war. All of these are different ways of creating conflict through a cause. So you can see how that would start some kind of problems with other people, is instigating a war. That is a plot point that is motivated by cause, which is not the easiest element to get across. Maybe for an introductory type video, this might not be the easiest element to do, but if you have a different version of cause that's not in this list, so there's at least 50,000 different illustrations here in the database that are continually being added to when other people are in here trying to work out their own stories. So if you have a different version of cause, let's just say making something happen, somebody was motivated to make something happen, maybe that could cause conflict in the story. And your story is exploring what happens when people are always trying to make something happen. You can see that's not part of the list that's there. It's just a sub list of everything. And so you can ask Subtext to review it for you. And what this does is it uses machine learning to go look and see how that compares to the actual definition of cause. And it will give you an answer here. So making something happen is a pretty good example of cause. Causing something might even be stronger in this case. Or you might also want to consider instigating something or causing someone to do something. If you want to, you can change it to maybe some of these suggestions, or if that is exactly what you like, you just hit OK. And now it's changed the illustration to your idea of it. And what's great is then every day we go through, check if it is in fact correct, because sometimes the artificial intelligence might get things a little bit off. We align it to be more closer to the narrative model, and then everybody gets to use it. This is nothing that is infringing on what your story is about, making something happen. You could tell a million different stories about that, but it's very specific to the idea of cause. And these drop downs are here throughout. For instance, the story goal, if I open this up, you'll see it has an illustration of progress. So the goal is going to be about improving something. So you can see how if people are trying to improve something, trying to make something happen fits in alignment with that. But sometimes that can cause too much trouble. And what you need to do instead is do the opposite of cause, which is just to look at the effects. So seeing the effects of one's handiwork within groups, instead of trying to make something happen, the only way we're going to get success and actually start to improve things is by seeing the effects. That is what is going on here. It's trying to take this story formed idea that you have here, and it's trying to help you align your storytelling with the structure so that your narrative maintains structural integrity and that everything turns out to be meaningful in the end. So we have the 4 through lines, which are super important to establish. The plot and players, so you can see how it started, what kind of goal shows up, whether or not that ended in some sort of success, who the players are, and then character arcs. A lot of people are familiar with character arcs. These are the very specific subjective arcs of the 2 pivotal characters, the main character and the obstacle character. And you can see here that this is a character who's maintaining what it is that they're being driven by, in this case, unending. And if I open this up, the problem of working around the clock for a group, that's very similar to Silence of the Lambs. If you think of Clarice and the fact that the lambs are always screaming, she's driven by that unending screaming, working around the clock for victims. That's what's driving her personally. And at the end, they're still screaming. So that's why it's her moving into that. And again, these are all different versions of what unending could look like. If you wanted to do something very different, for instance, for Silence of the Lambs, if I did working around the clock for victims, should say it's an excellent version of unending. Yeah, it's an excellent example. So you get graded on it. I can just say, okay, and now working around the clock for victims, that's exactly who she is. I can then develop it so that it gets even stronger at the end. And then the other person, the other side of that argument is the obstacle character who is going to be moving from cause to effect. Hannibal Lecter is very much trying to instigate things happening to then. I'm going to step back and just look at the effects of my handiwork. And that's what gives the story meaning. And again, same situation, instigating someone to be something, which sounds a lot like Hannibal Lecter. In this interim transitional stage, you have the option of developing your story to get to a story form. It is very manual now. You're going to have to go into the premise builder and select the different items that come up in your conversation with Muse. Eventually, it'll be a thing where at the end, you'll just be able to ask, okay, do I have enough to create a story? Or it might even let you know, hey, you've got enough in here to build out the narrative structure of your story. Would you like me to do it? And then when you go into your stories, they're separated now between stories that have story forms or the stories that you're just working on in Muse here that haven't quite yet have the structure. If you tap this, you'll be taken to this view of your story because it's more in that development stage. Whereas if you're in the story formed part of your story section, when you tap on a story, it will then open it up fully here so that not only can you imagine, which is all you can really do in Muse, but then you can develop out the different through lines, the story beats that happen in those through lines, then weave them in the plot, and then eventually here down at the bottom, export them out to write in whatever writing software that you appreciate. That's the walkthrough of the very basic way of interacting with subtext with a focus on the boxes section and what all these buttons mean and how you can go about starting to develop your story. If you have any questions, always feel free to reach out. Otherwise, I will see you later.